presentation. So hello everybody. I'm glad everybody joined us. I was mentioning to a couple of the initial attendees. We didn't have anyone at the very beginning of this, so I'm glad that everyone has chosen to come out, which is awesome. And so, as the name suggests, for this program today, we are going to be doing a live craft along, assembling an elephant. We're also going to be doing a virtual tour of the elephant gallery at the museum, and we're going to be sharing some cool elephant facts, some cool fossils. So it should be pretty fun. My name is Nick Van Acker. I am an educator at the museum, and I am one of our science educators. So I am very excited and passionate to talk about elephants with you all. If you do have any questions or comments or anything throughout the day today, you can feel free to leave those in either the Q&A or in the chat box. And if we want to get started on that, you guys can feel free to use the chat to let me know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see where people are coming from to our virtual events. So if you'd like to let us know that information, that would be awesome. But we can get started. So for our craft, we're going to need a couple of different materials. And the main one that we're going to need is the Assembling an Elephant PDF sheet. So I'm going to post a link to those in the chat box, just in case you guys don't have them printed out yet. But this is going to be the main material we are going to need. So make sure to get that printed if you don't have one printed out already. And I have pasted our craft list in the chat of all the materials you should need today. So like I said, if you don't have that printed yet, you can click on the link and print it out. But other than our assembling an elephant sheet, we are also going to need a pair of scissors, which we should have around. We're going to need some colored pencils, some markers, some crayons, whatever you like to color with. We will also need a hole punch if you have one handy. If you don't have one, that's totally okay. We can make do with other things, but it might make your life a little bit easier. And then we will also need brass fasteners. And these can be a little bit hard to come by. So if you don't have these at home, that's totally okay. We have a couple of other options that we can get to when we talk about assembling our elephant. So that is totally okay. So just in case anybody does need any time to print out their sheets, we aren't going to be doing any cutting or assembling for a little minute here. So you do have time to print those out, but still recommend doing that now if you haven't yet. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of our craft. So on the Assembling an Elephant sheet, we have two sheets, sheet 1 and sheet 2, which is pretty self-explanatory. But you'll notice that right now our sheets are flat, just like most pieces of paper are. So before we actually do any cutting or assembling, right now when our sheets are just printed and all assembled together, this is actually going to be our best time to do our coloring, which might seem a little bit backwards usually when you're doing a craft, but this is going to be the easiest time. So if you guys have your colored pencils, you have your sheets ready to go, and you'd like to start coloring, you can feel free to do so. And while we're coloring, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the elephants at the museum. We'll do a little bit of a virtual tour of the elephant gallery. You can see a little sneak peek of that behind me. And I've also got some cool fossils and elephant facts to share. So we'll talk about those things. And again, if you guys have any questions or comments at all, feel free to leave them in the chat. I love talking about stuff like this. So first things first, I'm going to show you guys the elephant gallery at the museum to show you what this craft is based on, the elephants that we have at the museum. So I'm going to share my screen. I will show you guys a little bit of what the museum looks like. So if you guys have been to the museum before, you'll definitely recognize this space. This is up on our second floor landing. And if you've been to the museum before, or just by looking at the picture, you can probably notice that this space is overflowing with elephants. We have a couple of elephant skeletons, we have a couple of elephant skulls, all sorts of cool elephant stuff going on up on this floor of the building. There are actually 3 different types of elephants that you are able to see in the world. We actually have all 3 of those elephants in the museum as well, which is pretty cool. So those 3 types of elephants are the Asian elephant, the African forest elephant, and the African bush elephant. So we'll start off small, and then we'll get kind of bigger when we're talking about these different spaces. So the smallest elephant that we have on display in the museum, the first one that we'll start looking at, is the Asian elephant. And this is the smaller skeleton right here. And if you click on the plus button here, you can actually see a close-up of the Asian elephant skull, which is pretty cool. This activity, this virtual tour, is also available on our website. I can post a link to that in the chat if you guys want to check that out. pull the chat down so I can actually see it. But it's just on our website at museum.msu.edu. And then this one is called Second Floor Landing. It's a 360-degree image. But so this Asian elephant that I was talking about, that we could zoom in on here a little bit. One thing that you might notice about this Asian elephant is that when you picture an elephant, you probably picture something that's pretty large. And this Asian elephant seems a little bit smaller than that, right? And there's a good reason for this. And the reason is that our Asian elephant is not an adult Asian elephant. It's a skeleton from a juvenile elephant. So this Asian elephant is not full grown. Most Asian elephants are a lot larger than this one. And as the name suggests, Asian elephants are found in Asia. So they're found in places like India, Sumatra, Nepal, and Borneo. They are endangered, like a lot of elephants are, unfortunately, which we can talk about a little bit later. But this Asian elephant skeleton actually has a pretty cool story to it. And I have a picture to kind of help us tell that story. And the really cool thing about this Asian elephant skeleton is that it's been at the museum for a very, very long time. So some of our skeletons are more recent. Some of our museum building is a little bit more recent. But this Asian elephant skeleton has been with us for a very long time. The picture that I am pulling up here that you should be able to see right now up on the screen. Let me know if you can't see that. But this picture shows the Asian elephant skeleton in the museum way back when, back before the museum was actually in the building that we're currently in, back when we were in a different building. And this picture was taken in the 1890s. So this Asian elephant skeleton has actually been a part of the museum collection at least since the 1890s. It goes actually probably back further than that to the 1860s. But you can see here it's on display amidst all these kind of curiosity cabinets and cool stuff back in our old museum back a couple of buildings ago. So yeah, we've had this elephant skeleton in the museum for over 100 years. Not always on display, but always a part of our collection, which is pretty awesome. Some of the skeletons are a little bit more recent, though. For instance, the skeleton that is behind our Asian elephant skeleton. And this is the skeleton that's actually the inspiration for today's craft. So this is an African elephant. This is one of our African bush elephants. And so I'll click on the plus button again, so you guys can see it in a little bit more detail. This is kind of the classic elephant everybody thinks of, both when they visit the museum and just when people picture an elephant. Picture the big, tall, lumbering elephant skeleton. This elephant is super, super cool. These elephants are some of the largest elephant species in the world. And not only that, but they're also the largest land animal in the world currently alive right now. They can be up to 13 feet tall, and they can weigh up to 10 tons, which is just gigantic, which is really, really cool. And I actually have some cool historical photos of this elephant as well. Our craft today is called Assembling an Elephant. And so I thought it might be fun to show some photos of when this elephant was actually being assembled to put up in the museum. So I can pull those photos up here in my photo sharing thing. And so these photos are from when the African bush elephant skeleton was first donated to the museum. And so as I scroll through them, you're going to see a lot of different museum employees who worked back, and I believe this was in the 60s or the 70s, but worked to put this elephant skeleton together. And what they're doing throughout this process is called articulation. So whenever you put the bones together of an animal, it's called articulating the skeleton. And articulation is a super cool process. It's something we don't think about a lot when we look at a skeleton in a museum. But articulation is super important for making sure that a skeleton in a museum stays together. Otherwise, the skeleton would just fall apart. In our body, skeletons are held together with things like ligaments and tendons that hold bone to bone and bone to muscle. But when those things break down, we're just left with a pile of bones. So museum preparators and curators and exhibit people have to put the bones together with things like glue and metal and all sorts of different plates and brackets and processes that it's a whole skill set that people have to help put skeletons together. So you can see in this picture, they are assembling the spine of the skeleton, and this is in a different area of the museum. And then I like this picture a lot. This shows them assembling the feet of the skeleton. And you can see some of that metal, we would call it like a metal armature, but basically a secondary metal skeleton that's used to help assemble all of the bones. So here they're putting together the hands and the feet of the elephant skeleton. And then as we scroll through the rest of these pictures, they're adding more bones on. So they're adding the back leg bones here. And then you can see they're adding the ribs on now, adding those onto the spine after the spine's been hung up. And this is them adding the front legs onto the skeleton, and then finally hanging the skull, putting away the ladders, and then finally hanging up the tusks until we have a completed elephant skeleton on display in the museum. These are some of my favorite historical photos from the museum. It's really, really cool to see the process of how a skeleton actually gets put together. And I'm excited you guys are going to have kind of an opportunity to put together an elephant skeleton of your own in a couple of minutes once everyone's done coloring. So that's pretty fun. I like looking at that quite a bit. So yes, so that is our African bush elephant. But if we go over to the other side of the gallery, you are going to see that we have 3 more skulls, 3 more different types of elephants in this gallery. I'm going to stop sharing because I actually have these 3 elephants right behind me. So if you can see on my screen, I've got 3 elephants here, 3 elephant skulls. And some of them are going to be familiar to elephants that we already talked about. And one of them's a little bit different. So behind me on my right, there is an Asian elephant skull. Again, we talked about Asian elephants already. They're one of the smaller species of elephant. They live in Asia, like we talked about. And then right behind my head, we have an African bush elephant. Again, the largest species of elephant, the largest terrestrial animal on Earth. But there's one more elephant skull right over here, or a skull of something almost like an elephant. And I'm curious if you guys know what this skull is, if you want to leave it in the chat box, if you have an idea what it might be. And if you've been to the museum before, you might know what this is already. But if you don't, I'm curious to see what people's guesses are. It's something that's related to elephants, but it's an animal that is no longer alive today. This is an animal that is extinct. So I'll wait and see what people have to say. We've got one answer rolling in. We'll see maybe if a couple of other people have ideas, but if not, it looks like this answer is correct, which is awesome. Let's see. Yeah, so we've got a couple of responses here. And so a couple people said that this was a mammoth skull, which is totally correct, which is great. So this is the skull of an animal that's called a Columbian mammoth. When you hear the word mammoth, you might usually think of the animal, the woolly mammoth, and you might not know they're actually a couple different types of mammoths that used to exist in the world. So there were woolly mammoths that lived a little bit further north than us. They might have lived a little bit in Michigan, but there were also Columbian mammoths, which lived a little bit further south. This Columbian mammoth right behind me was actually found in Kansas by one of our museum curators back in the 70s. And really cool thing about this Columbian mammoth skull is that it's actually over 500,000 years old, 500,000 years old. So that's a really, really old skull. Not only that it was found in the 70s, which was about 50 years ago now, but also that it's over 500,000 years old. It's pretty awesome. So I have a couple of different mammoth artifacts that we can look at, which are pretty fun. Just to remind you guys what an elephant looks like. This is what an elephant might look like, an African bush elephant when it is alive. To show you guys the differences between an elephant and a mammoth, I also have a model of a mammoth here. And this is a Columbian mammoth, like the skull that we were talking about. There's a little bit difference in size here. These aren't quite to scale, but you can see on these models that mammoths and elephants are actually pretty different. They have some of the same features. They obviously have trunks, they've got tusks, but other than the fact that it's covered in hair, mammoths are a very different body shape than elephants too. They have kind of this hump. They have what people might call a pompadour of hair up on the top here. So they're very different animals. We can tell that they're related, but they look pretty different. And to even show that even further, I actually have a fossil from a mammoth, and this is a mammoth tooth. This is one of my favorite fossils. Mammoth teeth are super, super cool. But just to remind you how big this animal actually is, this is just one tooth from a mammoth. And if I were to hold it right up to next to my head here, I'm actually going to turn off my background so you guys can see this fossil a little bit better. You can see that this fossil is absolutely gigantic. It's about the size of my head. Just like our teeth, mammoth teeth have the top part of their tooth that sticks out of their gums, and then the bottom part, which is called the root, that would be inside of their jawbone. So only usually about the top part of this tooth would have been sticking out. But mammoth teeth are super cool because they are covered in all of these ridges on top here. And the reason that they're covered in these ridges is because of what mammoths eat. So mammoths are what we call grazers. And a grazer is an animal that's going to eat a lot of grass. And you might not know this if you don't eat a lot of grass every single day, but grass is really, really hard to break down for a lot of animals. It's really hard for animals to eat grass. So any animal that's going to eat grass, things like cows or mammoths, are going to need to have really good, strong teeth that are able to grind that grass up and help break it down a little bit before they try to digest it and get all those good nutrients out of it. So mammoths have all of these cool ridges on top that help them break down the grass that they're trying to eat. Now, there's another elephant, another type of elephant that used to live in Michigan that's a little bit different than a mammoth, and they had a little bit different teeth. Um, so I have another model of an ancient elephant right here. And this is an ancient elephant that is called a mastodon. And if you guys are from Michigan, you're probably familiar with mastodons if you've heard the word mastodon before. Mastodons are actually our state fossil. And we find mastodon fossils all over Michigan. It seems like once every couple of years we hear a newspaper article, we see a news story about a farmer digging up a field and finding a mastodon out in their field. But especially if we compare mastodons and mammoths to each other, you can see that mastodons are also a pretty different looking elephant. Again, they have trunks, they have tusks, but they are a very different shape and a very different size than both elephants and the mammoths that we were looking at earlier. And mastodons, like I said, had a very different diet than mammoths. And you can see that by looking at their teeth. So I have a mastodon tooth right here that is, you can see, still really, really large, still very big, but really different than our mammoth tooth. And the main difference is all of these bumps that we have on top of the mastodon tooth. All of these bumps are actually what give the mastodon its name. Mastodon means lobe tooth or bump tooth. And the reason for all these bumps is because the mastodons, instead of being grazers like our mammoths, were something called browsers. And so animals that are browsers would eat things like twigs and leaves and sticks. And that's called browse when we talk about animals eating them. So that makes sense. An animal that eats browse is called a browser. But all these bumps will be really, really useful for helping to kind of break up all the sticks and leaves and twigs that the mastodon would be eating. So this is our mastodon tooth. This is our mammoth tooth. And unfortunately, I don't have an elephant tooth right here with me. But elephant teeth are almost a combination of these two, which is pretty cool. They have some of the little ridges and they also have some bumps on their teeth because elephants are more, wouldn't say that they're a browser or a grazer. They're probably more of a browser, but they eat sort of a combination, whatever plants they're able to get their hands on. So elephant teeth are kind of a combination between those two things, which is pretty awesome. I've been talking a lot about elephants and been giving a lot of elephant facts, talking about a lot of ancient elephants. And probably based off of what time it is, you guys are about done with your coloring if you haven't already finished it up. So we can get back to our craft and work on assembling our elephant. I'll show you guys a couple of the different colorations that I did. Just because I had fun with this. I, at one point, made a little bit of a rainbow elephant, which was pretty fun. Just used my colored pencils to make all sorts of different rainbow colors on my elephant. Another one that I did was coloring all of the bones individual colors. So all of the skull is one color, for instance. All the backbones are another color. All the ribs are another color. So that's a fun way we could go about it. And then I also went a little crazy with one of mine and covered it all in vines and little flowers, which is pretty fun. So I think this is the one that I'm actually going to go with today. But if you guys are done coloring, and if you're not, it's totally fine. You can always, of course, finish coloring later. We can actually start assembling our elephant. And this is a pretty easy process. So you might guess the first step for assembling our elephant is going to be cutting our elephant shapes out. There are 6 shapes on the 2 sheets. So all we have to do is follow the dotted lines and cut our elephant shapes out. So I'm going to start doing that. And while I do have a couple more elephant facts to share. There is no end to the elephant facts that I'm happy to share with everyone. But I'm starting out cutting out my skull, and that reminds me of a couple of different elephant facts. So for one thing, one of my favorite elephant facts, and I can pull up my virtual background again to help share this information, is about elephant skulls. So if you aren't super familiar with elephants, you might not know your way around an elephant skull. But one of the really cool things about elephant skulls is the big hole that you can see right in the middle of the skull here. And I'm curious what you guys think that hole might be for. And if you picture an elephant, you might be able to figure it out, but I'm curious if you want to leave in the chat what you think that hole might be for in the middle of the elephant skull. If you're in the know, you might know, but if you don't, I'm curious to hear what people think it might be for. And there's been a lot of different ideas throughout history. Obviously, we know now what it's for, but it took people a little while to figure out what exactly that hole was meant to be used for. All right, so somebody says rope, that it was used for rope. I'm curious if that's what they intended or if that was a typo. But curious. Oh, actually, I saw, maybe she's referring to one of the pictures of the elephants when they were assembling the elephant. There was some rope that went through there. Curious though, yeah. And if we don't have any answers, that's totally okay too. But so for a long time, when people first discovered elephants, and this was true of a lot of the animals that people would discover, we didn't know a lot about animal anatomy. We didn't know exactly how animals all fit together. And also, even if people saw a living animal, they didn't necessarily know what the skeleton of that animal looked like. So if we go all the way back to ancient Greece and we picture ourselves as ancient Greeks, imagine never having seen an elephant before, or maybe seeing a living elephant, but never really being exposed to what an elephant looks like, not seeing an elephant every single day. So if an ancient Greek person saw this elephant skull and they saw this gigantic hole in the middle, it's understandable that they might compare it to skulls of other animals that they knew about. So for instance, they might compare it to a human skull. And human skulls have two holes in the middle for these two things right here that we use every day, our eyes. So ancient Greek people, for a long while, or at least when they first discovered elephant skeletons, saw that big hole and assumed that it must have been for a gigantic eye that existed in the middle of whatever this creature's face was. And that made sense. If they had an eye right in the middle, they had these huge tusks that came out that the ancient Greek people knew were teeth. So they assumed that the elephant skulls were actually from a cyclops. So that's where we get the idea of cyclops from, is by ancient Greek people finding elephant skulls and not quite knowing what they were. Of course, over time, we did discover what the hole is actually for. And you might have guessed at this point, the hole is actually where the trunk comes out. The trunk is an elephant's nose, and just like our nose, it obviously needs a hole in order to be able to bring air into the lungs. So there needs to be a hole in the skull there for the air from the trunk to come into the body of the elephant. So elephant eyes are actually on the sides of their heads, as you might know if you can picture an elephant, and the trunk comes out the hole in the middle, which is pretty cool. There's also a few other fun facts about elephant skulls as we continue cutting out. I'm a little slow on mine because I've been talking as I cut. But another cool thing is those tusks that I talked about a second ago. We're probably pretty familiar when we talk about elephant tusks about the idea of elephant ivory. It's obviously a big topic when we talk about elephants, and elephants have been hunted for a long, long time because of the ivory of their tusks. The crazy thing, though, about elephant ivory is that it's not anything special. Elephant tusks, people might think, are these really cool long bones that come out of the elephant. You might think that they hold some sort of, special has some sort of special powers. But the elephant tusks are actually just teeth. They are the elephant's incisors. And incisors, if you can feel your own teeth right in the front of your mouth, incisors are your top front teeth, your four front teeth, and your four bottom teeth. Those are all incisors. So elephants just have really specialized incisors that are really elongated, and they use them for all sorts of different purposes. If you've seen videos of elephants before, you might have seen them use those tusks to battle other elephants, sometimes and for different reasons. But usually they'll use them to help gather food. If they need to knock down a tree, if they need to do all sorts of different stuff. The tusks are really multi-purpose tools, which is pretty cool. We have one more fact about elephant teeth as well as I continue cutting out. Almost done here. But that is about the rest of the elephant's teeth. So we know that their tusks are incisors, but the elephant also has some cool molars that you can see in the background a little bit here, but they look very similar to the teeth that I showed earlier from the mastodons and the mammoths. And elephant molars are interesting because they're very, very different than human teeth. So for humans, we're used to the idea of having two sets of teeth. We have our baby teeth that grow in when we're babies, and then over time, we slowly lose those and they get replaced with our adult teeth that we have for the rest of our lives. And so as humans, we think it's pretty normal to have two sets of teeth. But for elephants, that would actually be pretty weird. And the reason for that is because of how their teeth work. So elephants, like we talked about, would be more like browsers than grazers. They're constantly grinding on those teeth, breaking stuff down. And they work really, really hard, eating sometimes whole trees, all sorts of just really tough material. And so over time, occasionally, elephant teeth will break off on the front and just be ground down over time. So rather, though, than the elephant losing that tooth and just having that tooth fall out and then having another tooth grow up from the bottom, elephant teeth actually work like a conveyor belt, which is pretty weird. So rather than a tooth growing up from the bottom, all the elephant teeth come from the back and push their teeth forward. So elephants have multiple sets of teeth. They don't have just two, but they'll go through several sets of molars in their lifetime. Of course, the same thing is true for elephants. That's true of humans. And that is once you lose all of your teeth, you unfortunately don't have any more. So elephants, when they get really, really old, might have gone through all of their sets of teeth, even though they have more sets than we do, and eventually just lose all their teeth, unfortunately have no more teeth to eat with, which is pretty cool. It's pretty weird. I'm almost done cutting out my last leg here, and then we can move on to the next step. And you can let me know in the comments if anybody needs any more time to help cut to cut their parts out, but I'm pretty sure everybody should be done by this point. I went a little slow sharing all my elephant facts. But after this point, assembling our elephant is pretty easy. So you might have noticed when you were cutting out your elephant or when you were coloring that each part of the elephant has a colorful X on it. And we can see on my elephant skull, there is a red X here. This should be pretty self-explanatory, but basically all we have to do to assemble our elephant is match up the colored X's. So there's a red X on the skull here. You'll see that on the body of our elephant, there is also a red X. So what we're going to do, if you have brass fasteners at home at least, is that we are going to use our hole punch to punch a hole at the location of every colored X. If you don't have brass fasteners, that's totally okay. What you can do, if you want to just make an elephant skeleton, is use a little bit of glue, a little bit of tape, glue dot, whatever you've got, and you can just glue your skeleton together. Unfortunately, it won't be able to move at that point, but that's an option. If you do want your skeleton to move, you can also punch a hole through it and then attach it with something else. You could use even something like a push pin if you want to push pins through it, so it has that kind of that joint that's able to move around. You could tie a string through it. There's a couple of different options. So if you don't have brass fasteners, that's totally okay. Or if you want to get a pickup order for them, you can get them from almost any office supply store or craft store. So you could always punch your holes now and then put in brass fasteners later. However you want to do your craft is totally okay. But I'm going to start punching my holes right in the middle of the X's. And I'm going to do the neck just as a little bit of a show and tell for you guys so you can see just exactly how it goes together. But so I punched a hole in my head over the red X. I punched a hole in my neck over the red X. And then all we're going to do is line those holes up. And again, like I said, if you have a string that you're going to use, you could tie a string through this. I'm going to use brass fasteners just because that's what I have handy. Best tool for the job. There we go. Open up my brass fasteners. And these brass paper fasteners are super cool if you're using them for crafting. They have a circular head on them, and then they have these two kind of little legs down at the bottom. And so what we're actually able to do is stick the two little legs through the hole. Make sure you guys can see that. And then we're just going to pull the legs apart so they secure in the back. These used to be used a lot more for securing pieces of paper together. Now they're mostly just used for crafting, as far as I know. I'll turn off my virtual background so everyone can see it again a little bit better. There we go. But so this is what it's going to look like from the back. You can see I spread those legs out of the brass fastener. And then on the front, it's able to rotate. So now our elephant has a head, which is great. After that, we're just going to continue punching holes in all of our X's on all of our legs and the body. The yellow X on the top of the body might be a little bit far away if you have a hole punch, which is totally fine. You can just punch as close to it as you can. Or if, assuming that you are an adult, you can use a pair of scissors, or you can get an adult's help to use a pair of scissors to just kind of punch a hole a little bit through there if you need to. But otherwise, I just punched my hole a little bit north of that yellow X, and that's totally fine. The only other slightly tricky part about this is that if we think about an elephant, if we think about an elephant skeleton, some of the legs are going to be closer to us, and some of the legs are going to be further away. So I can start off with this biggest leg that I've got right here. You can see it's got a shoulder blade up here. It's called a scapula. And then the rest of the leg down here, this is going to be our largest one. It's got the yellow X on it. This is going to go on the front of our elephant. This is going to go in front of our elephant's body because that leg is closest to us. So I'll put a brass fastener through there so we're able to get that nice and close. But the elephant, or excuse me, the leg that has the green X right behind it here, not quite sure if you can see that there, but you can see that on your paper. The leg that has the green X is actually going to go behind our elephant body. And the reason for that is just for scale, just for giving us a little bit of dimension. There's obviously legs on the right-hand side of the elephant's body and on the left-hand side. So we're creating almost a little bit of a sandwich. There's going to be the yellow leg X, or the yellow X leg on top, then the elephant's body, and then on the bottom, we'll have the green leg. And this is going to be the same thing that we do on the back legs as well. The purple X is going to go on top of the body, and the blue X leg is going to go underneath the body. And of course, if you don't do this, or if you do this incorrectly, you can, of course, switch them around or assemble your elephant however you want. I'm not going to judge. I will put the last leg on here. We got a purple leg. And again, the purple leg is going to go in the front of our elephant body. I will put my brass fastener through there. And the blue leg is going to go behind the elephant body. So I'm going to punch my last hole to put that through here. Another option as well, I printed my elephant out on printer paper. You might have printed it out on cardstock if you wanted it to be a little bit thicker, or if you didn't, you can always do that later. But if you don't have cardstock handy, but you do have construction paper, after you've assembled your elephant, or I guess probably before you've assembled your elephant would be a better idea. But you can always glue these pieces to construction paper and cut them out. And that creates kind of a nice colorful border around them, which is fun. And then you can also give it a little bit more stability. You'll notice my elephant's a little bit floppy. So it's nice if it's got kind of that extra layer of protection. So it's able to be a little bit less floppy. But yeah, so that is how we assemble an elephant. You notice it's a very similar process actually to how the elephant went together at the museum. We even used, if you use brass fasteners, little pieces of metal to keep our skeleton together. This is a super fun activity. It's a super simple activity. So I hope you guys will make more elephants at home. I know that I had a lot of fun making this craft. I already, like I said, made my rainbow one earlier. I have my ivy covered elephant now. I'm probably going to make my other rainbow elephant after this program is over. But yeah, this has been a really fun program, and I hope you guys have had a good time as well. If anyone has any questions or comments, you can feel free to leave those in the chat. I'll be around for a couple more minutes, just kind of finishing up my elephant. But otherwise, I had a great time today. I hope you all did as well. And be sure to follow us on our social media to learn more about some of the programs we have coming up. We have a lot of different programs coming up in the future. You can find all of those at museum.msu.edu. Some of them might be craft-alongs like this, but we also have a lot of Science on a Sphere programming, which uses the Science on a Sphere gallery at the museum, which is really, really fun. We talk about all sorts of different topics. We also have a program coming up next week that's with Dr. Janita Brandt, who is an invertebrate paleontologist. It's called The Trouble with Trilobites, talking all about these cool little ancient critters that used to live in Michigan hundreds of millions of years ago. And then we also have Darwin Discovery Day coming up in a couple of weeks, which if you've been to the museum before, you might know is an annual event celebrating Darwin and biodiversity. This year's event is going to be virtual, of course, because we can't meet in person, but we're still going to have a lot of the great aspects that Darwin Day has. We're going to be doing some crafting. We're going to have really cool interactions options to, or really cool opportunities to interact with scientists live over Zoom. And they're going to be talking about all sorts of cool topics. So definitely check it out on our website. That Darwin Discovery Day does require registration ahead of time, so make sure to get registered. And we're also partnering with the East Lansing Public Library to do Darwin Discovery craft bags. So if you guys do like crafting a lot, or if you have friends who like crafting, you can be sure to check that out on the website as well and find out when those are available to pick up. But we've got all sorts of cool crafts in there as well. Awesome. Well, it was great speaking with you all today, and I loved getting some of the comments in here that you guys had, some of the questions that you had. Be sure to check out, like I said, all of our other programs, and I hope that you have a great rest of your days. Yes. All right. Thank you so much.